I always love finding out about older game adaptations of anime, and Ghost Sweeper Mikami, Joreishi wa Nice Body fits that bill nicely. But is Ghost Sweeper Mikami a good game and a worthy addition to the series it belongs to, or does it fall into the trappings of so many other licensed games based off anime? Pretty, but shallow, and not very fun. Well, let's find out. Ghost Sweeper Mikami is sadly one of the many import games that is completely without translation. Thankfully, this is also one that doesn't require any knowledge of Japanese to understand most of what is going on, with the only thing you'll be fully missing being dialogue and setup. Basically, Ryoko Mikami and her two assistants by the names of Tako Yakashima and Okino receive a package that contains a statue that is rumored to be worth a healthy sum. With that incentive, naturally Reiko sets her way off over a handful of platforming and action-filled levels to achieve each of the 7 zones needed to complete the statue. If you're able to understand Japanese, or even if you don't and can just appreciate when a game goes out of its way to have a story, you'll be quite happy, as not only are there intro and outro cutscenes, but also cutscenes after every level you beat. While I'm not currently too familiar with Ghost Sweeper as an anime or the characters in it, I can at least let you know that the personalities of everyone were present, and I got a good sense of the cast just from the moments we got from them here. What we get here in the game is a nice sample platter of how the characters are in the rest of the series, and just like the Senga story, it makes me want to give the series itself more attention. The game is a fairly basic action platformer, where you make your way across the level, whacking away bad guys, while hopping around collecting power-ups before finally fighting a boss. The game also mixes things up with a level where you're riding on the back of a cat after being shrunk, and also flying around on your room in a shmup-like section. Mikami's abilities include a standard attack, the ability to attack anything that might be coming from above, she has a screen clearing attack, and she can also latch onto floating platforms. You can also get your hands on 3 major power-ups that give your attacks more range, in different formations, along with health pickups and screen wipes. There is a 4th power-up, but that's reserved for level 7 only, and is the worst item in the entire game. Sadly, the gameplay is a bit limited, with most enemies going down in no more than 2 hits, but that doesn't prevent it from being quite a bit of fun. It feels great to slash your way through an entire level, taking no damage and landing each jump. Halfway through the game, Mikami is shrunk, and she is forced to take chase after the creature that shrunk her. To do this, she rides on the back of a cat, who speeds along rooftops, with all sorts of now enlarged wildlife trying to take Mikami out, all the while having to avoid obtrusive bits of metal. This section was a needed concept, but I wasn't a huge fan of how clustered up enemies got to be near the ending of it. There is also a level where you get onto a broomstick and fly around, and again, good in concept, but in execution, it's sadly a bit underwhelming, with stiff, unruly controls and just the lack of fluidity that the rest of the game usually had. Not to mention, you're still forced to use your swipe attack instead of being granted a projectile, which was a bummer. Levels were usually structured fairly well, with enough platforming and secret areas to keep the game from feeling too linear and similar. Every level was unique and varied and quite different from the last, and each of them was split up into 2 areas, and then the boss room. The only exception to this was the unique levels, which threw you right into the boss after you completed the rest of the stage. The only level I outright despised past the final bit of the rooftop section was level 7, which was just a complete mess. You're forced to use the unresponsive and lackluster platform spawning attack to make platforms, but there is no clear indication of where you need to go, and you constantly had to make blind jumps after a lot of climbing. This also showcased that sometimes the grab move just doesn't want to work. Also, something fun to note, each of the levels were based off of an episode from the show, including a cursed train, a creepy greenhouse, and a clown-infested construction site. While you do only get 3 lives, you get unlimited continues, and there is also a password system. If you die, you respawn back at the start of the area you were in, and if you game over, you restart the entire stage. This was a really nice touch that prevented the game from feeling too unfair or frustrating, especially later in the game. The enemies in the game come in several varieties, and most were fun to fight, outside of some of the smaller, quicker enemies that seemed to slip through my attacks. I wouldn't call any of them a full-on challenge, but they were dangerous if you weren't careful, especially around pits and while platforming. Each of the bosses, save for the final boss, were awesome looking pushovers. I beat every boss save for one on the first try, but I still had a good time fighting them, even if they were a bit too easy compared to the stage right before them. Just like with the levels, each of the bosses are based off a big bad from the series itself, which is really neat. My favorite had to be the Ghost Girl spirit, but I really enjoyed each of the bosses overall. Visually, the game is really nice to look at, with crisp sprite work, lots of detail, and fluid animation. Everything was vibrant and colorful, each sprite stood out, every area looked visually unique, and it perfectly captured the anime style. None of the levels or enemies ever felt too samey visually, and Mikami and friends had a lot of expression to their in-game sprites. Not to mention that a lot of the portraits were fun to look at. I'm glad they included these instead of just standard boxes of text, because it really gave the game that extra bit of flair I love in these titles. I also love that Ryoko changed outfits for every stage. Sound-wise, the game sounded pretty good, although some of the effects sounded a tad bit too stock standard with how these sort of games sound. The music, on the other hand, sounded really nice and fitting for each area, and I bobbed my head along to some of the songs as well. With all that said, Ghost Sweeper Mikami, Joreishi wa Nice Body is basically all I look for in import games on the Super Famicom. It's fun, silly, visually pleasing romp from an anime you might not be familiar with, and for fans, it's a fun Cliff Notes version of a handful of episodes. Give it a play if you're in the mood for some import goodness. As always, if you want to help support the channel, please consider sharing the video with a friend or checking out my Patreon linked in the description below. A big thank you to my wonderful friend Orion Knight for drawing up these wonderful animation stills of Punish Need. If you have any comments, questions, or recommendations, leave them in the comments as I read and reply to everything. Until next time, this is Thierry Williamson signing off until the next video. See ya guys!